to our webinar today. We have people from all over the world watching, and we are excited to talk to you about jobs, careers, and hiring. Except we want to start by eliminating one of those words. I want to crush one of these words, and that's careers. I hate the word career, and here's why. By the way, this is Bo Johnson.
Hey, everybody.
You know Bo from some of our podcasts. I'm Pat Lencioni, I should introduce. Cody Thompson is going to be joining us a little bit later. He's taking your questions as we go today. And Bo's going to be emceeing and asking me some questions.
Yeah.
And just so you know, we're here in our office in California. That's where we do our podcasts, on the other side of that glass. Desk over there. That's over there. Amador's desk. She cleaned it off for today's webinar. And Tracy sits over there, and Matt. So the whole crew that does our podcasts, we know a lot of people are podcast listeners that are watching today. So this is where we are in our office. Oh.
A bunch of people are actually watching with their teams, and our team's watching too.
Yes.
And I actually think we can show you them. They're real people. I don't know if you're seeing them or not.
Have we cut to our main conference room?
Those are the wonderful people we get to work with, doing this behind the scenes. They'll be engaging with you in the chat.
Right.
This is going to be a blast. This content's going to be
very informal.
Helpful.
Yeah, we're just going to be talking about this. But I have a real perspective, and that is I hate the word career for a couple reasons. First of all, it puts pressure on people. You know, when you're in college, you go to the career center, and it's like, I have to figure out my career, or there's a career fair, or people that are transitioning, they go to in their career, they go to a career counselor.
Yeah.
And all these things sound so heavy and permanent. It's like, oh no, I have to decide on my career.
There's pressure.
Exactly.
So like I have to, and you sit at home as a college student, you're 21 at the Thanksgiving table, and your aunt's asking you about your career, and you're like, career? It's such a big idea.
And it just overwhelms people, and it shouldn't.
Yeah.
The second thing is it limits our ability to flex, because then we start a job and we think, well, that's my career. And the truth of the matter is that's not true. And we think about, like, what's my future going to be, or what's my legacy going to be? And those are so unnecessary, frustrations, and they make us nervous. So I don't like using it. I don't even know if that word really has meaning. Now, I know that I'm going to slip in and use it today. And what I mean by that is just the series of jobs you have.
Yeah.
But we got to stop thinking about it as a career, or that every decision we make has to be figured out right now.
Yeah.
Because really what it's all about is work. Or as we said before, if there's anybody on here from Scotland, it's work. That's how you say it. I've been watching a TV show from Scotland. So your work is really important. So we're going to get rid of careers, and we're going to talk about two things: finding a job and hiring people. And most people watching this have probably done both.
Yeah.
They had to find a job, or they might be thinking about changing right now, or you've had to hire people. And that's what we're going to talk about, how Working Genius impacts that, but even much broader than that.
Okay, so let's start with the finding a job thing. What is it that people get wrong about this?
Right. And most do, because how many people go interview for a job and prepare for that, and then they start working there and they don't like it. And this is unnecessary, but the reason why, and I feel very much pressure because we call this at the whiteboard, that I'm going to have to do.
We never promised you would write on it.
Right,
we just
that's
said we'd
true.
be at the whiteboard. Yeah.
And I'm supposed to do art or something like that. But I really do think that there is a few things we do wrong when we're looking for a job. We're paying attention to the wrong things. And the first thing that we're paying attention to is the company name or brand. People will say, oh, I really want to work for that company. And, when I was a kid, it might have been a management consulting firm, an investment bank. Oh, I have to work for Goldman Sachs or something like that. And then later it became an internet company, or it could be, Apple or Google or something like that in technology. And when people think that's their goal, they're bound to be unhappy, because that says nothing about whether you're going to like that job. Okay, so that is so tiny. The other thing is people will get that job at that company that's everybody thinks it's the best place to work. And most of those companies have a shadow culture because people think, well, it's such a great place to work. And you go there, and even if they treat people bad, they stay. So often the very company that you've always wanted to work for isn't necessarily that great because they don't have to be. So that's a really bad reason to choose a job.
It's a tempting reason because it sounds good to get to say to people on an elevator, or again at a dinner party, or whatever it is, to say, I work at Apple, or I work at Disney, or whatever the brand is that's appealing to work at today. But the people who would work there would tell you the same thing. Once you get your name badge 30 days in, it's not the thing that's defining your work.
Yeah, exactly. So we got to put that out of our mind. because that does not make for day-to-day engagement, joy, energy, satisfaction.
Yeah.
So the other thing that we get wrong is we do it by industry, where we say, oh, I just want to work in entertainment or sports or high tech or medicine, in the field of medicine. And so we go, it's all about the industry. And this is true whether we're like, especially if we're like coming back into the workforce or getting out of college, but anybody can just say, I just want to work in that field. And it really has almost nothing to do with your ultimate job satisfaction. But we've been taught your career is about the company. And you know, like my dad worked at the same company for 40 years and then he retired. That wasn't good then, and it's not good now. Or the industry. Well, we just hired a guy here, Joe, who worked for 32 years in financial planning and analysis. And when we brought him here, he thought, well, I've been in 32 years for this company, and I'm going to go to work in organizational health and do this. And we're like, yeah, because we know what you love.
Yes.
And it can translate completely. But he thought I could probably never leave that industry.
Well, and so many people, perhaps the reason you signed up is you're interested in changing careers. And the idea of changing industries feels so disorienting.
Right.
Because if you said, no, I work in the movies or I work in healthcare, the notion of leaving that, you can't even fathom the notion of leaving higher education, even if you're totally dissatisfied with it.
Like it defines you.
Like it defines you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, you worked in church. People will think, well, I have to work in ministry my whole life. And what a wonderful thing. But it translates to other things too. And you can do ministry in other areas. So anyway, industry is not the thing. The next one would be the functional area or the role. People say, well, I've always worked in marketing or finance or fundraising or whatever else. And it's like, that doesn't mean anything. Or I've been a teacher. That's all I can do. And it's like, no, because there's so many different ways to look at this. And you don't want to limit yourself to these things. And so many people have. That's how I was taught. Like, what company you're going to work for, what industry you're going to work for, are you going to be in finance? Are you going to be in engineering? Are you going to be in sales?
Well, think about the way we build our resumes.
Yeah.
Your resume is typically, where did you work? You know, what kind of field is it in and what did you do there?
Right.
And you've experienced this if you've ever hired people or created a resume. Creating a resume is awful. It's excruciating. And
I'm doing it for my kids right now in high school and college.
It's awful. And then reviewing them is not that helpful. So this is the way we've always done it. And we've always kind of led to this result of people may stumble into great, happy, joyful careers and work.
But it's going to be luck.
But it's going to be
luck if they're doing it this way.
So what should we look at?
Well, there's two things. And we're going to focus on one of them mostly today. But the two things are the people or / culture where you're going to work. Do you fit into your values and the things that you think are important in the behaviors? Is there behavioral alignment? That is really important. I've spent much of my career talking about that over the last 25 years. And this is so important. But what we really want to talk about today is the next one, which is what I would call the work itself, the tasks, the work, the day-to-day hands-on, which sounds so tactical and unsexy, but at the end of the day, literally, you look back and you go, I had a great day because I got to do things that I enjoy, that feed me, that give me joy and energy. Now, but both of these are important. We could do a whole webinar around this, and we've talked about this before, but I want to explain. It was so funny because I think in 2x2 matrices. I started my career as a management consultant. I learned what a 2x2 matrix was, and so I really think that way. And so Tracy, just yesterday, I was sitting on the floor over there by her desk, and she said, I wish we had a 2x2 matrix. I said, I have this 2x2 matrix I've been thinking about, so I get to actually do this right now. So when we are thinking about those two areas, and this is a little countercultural to think about. So there's culture and people, right? So this is one of the axes, and this is yes and no, or high and low. And down here is the work, the tasks, the working genius. Yes and no, high and low, right? Clearly, working in an organization at the culture, and you're doing the kind of work that drains you of joy and energy. This is a bad place to be. A lot of people, though, if they work for the company they think they've always supposed to work for, or in the industry, they feel like, well, how can I leave? And they literally neither fit into the culture nor like what they're doing. Tragedy, real tragic. The question really, and of course, this is where we always want to be, the company that fits our culture and the work we love to do. We know that. The question is, which of these are better?
Can I make one observation?
Yeah, please.
And we're talking right now about finding a job and your career, and then in a few minutes we're going to talk about hiring. Isn't it remarkable how few questions in an interview are asked about either of these two things? That we don't ask about, you go look at the 10 approved questions from your HR department. They are so rarely actually about the work and about the culture.
I remember I went to work for a big company, Oracle, I'll just say it was Oracle, and it was the second job out of college. And I went to interview and I turned them down twice. Now, by the grace of God, I ended up going there and changing jobs, but I would never do it that way again, but it worked out. But the funny thing was, when I went to the interview, where the final interview, where the guy that would interview every employee, and his job was to decide whether I would be a good place. It'd be a good place for me to work. Yeah. All he did is look at my resume and said, "Well, you worked at Bain & Company. Yeah, you should work here." And it was like, but I didn't like working there. But I thought, well, my job is to get this job. And I literally talked my way into a job that was miserable for me.
Wow.
And though it worked out, thank you God, I don't recommend that. I don't recommend that. So the question is it better to work in a place where you're doing what you love, but in a place where the culture doesn't suit you, or to work in an organization where the culture fits you, but you're not doing what you love? And honest to God, this is better. Because if you go to work at a place that fits your culture, behaviors, you can figure out how to work in a job, and as long as it's big enough to do some things. And this is a semi-permeable membrane here.
Yeah.
You can pass through that.
Yeah.
But if you work at a place where you love what you do, but it's in the wrong culture, you can't change the culture on your own.
Yeah.
And you're gonna bump up against this for years. So I will say, even though we're gonna spend the rest of our time talking about the work, find a place that you believe fits who you are and values who you are, so that you have a fighting chance to get to the upper right here.
Fantastic.
Make sense?
Oh, totally makes sense. Okay, so let's talk about the work. The type of work that you would be doing in your job, the 8 to 5. We have a new model. Many of you are familiar with. Many of you listen to the Working Genius podcast. But Pat, would you just give us a quick overview of the 6 types of working genius? That is, the types of work that happen at work.
Yeah. You know what I love about this? Interviewing shouldn't be. Dating shouldn't be this way either, where you're going and meeting somebody and trying to talk them into liking you, and vice versa. When you go to an interview, you should be going there thinking, I want to do one of two things. I want to actually figure out if there's a match and then help them understand that so they'll hire me.
Wow.
Or figure out there's not a match and talk them out of even offering me a job.
Yeah.
It should be that much more like I'm looking for fit. But because we're looking at the resume and the company and the industry and all that, we don't do that. So let's really quick, I'm going to do the 3-minute overview of the 6 types of working genius, especially as it relates to us finding work. And the funny thing about this, these geniuses apply in any industry, in any company, in any function. Even in any function.
And there are 6 types of work required in any industry, in any function, right?
Exactly. And Matt was saying yesterday we should explain this, how they connect to one another.
Cool.
Right? And so the first genius is the genius of wonder. And that's the people who look for potential and ask questions and look around and say, could it be better?
Yeah.
Is this the way it should be? Hugely important. Whether or not people have ever been rewarded for it, every company, every project starts there and needs wonder. The next one is invention, which is the person who hears that awesome question and says, that's a great question. Let me come up with a solution out of nothing. So people that have invention wake up every day thinking, please let me do something novel and new. But they might not necessarily come up with a great idea, which is why we need the third, which is discernment, which is the person who has really good gut feel and they can evaluate that idea or that proposal and say, everything is telling me that that's going to work. I see a pattern here. I don't know if I can explain it perfectly, but I trust my gut. We trust they have intuition.
Yeah.
And so discernment is critical. Okay. The next one, after the discerner and the inventor work together and say, yes, this is good, then somebody has to come along and say, let me get people excited. That's the G for galvanizing. And that is, there are people that wake up in the world, Cody is one of them, you're going to be seeing him in a second, who love to inspire people and sell to people and get people motivated and say, hey, this is exciting, let's do this. You're one of these people too.
Yeah.
I'm not. I can do it, but I don't love it. And when I have to do it too much, I burn out. Okay, the next one is enablement, which is a really good thing. And that is enabling people to get things going and coming alongside and saying, I want to help you. I live to be the person who helps everyone else get things done. Probably the most valuable team members in many cases. Yeah. It's absolutely a gift. It is not just because they're nice. They have a God-given genius for coming alongside and knowing exactly what needs to be done and helping others. And then finally, there is tenacity, the T. Tenacity is about finishing, getting things done, blowing through obstacles, crossing things off a list. I have none of this. I don't understand these people. Either do you, but we love them because they like to keep it going until it's done. We have a Julie on our team and Jackie on our team that love to finish things, and thank God for them, or else none of these projects, none of these webinars, none of the book get finished. So these are the 6 types of working genius, and of course you know that 2 of these are your Yeti mug, commercial for Yeti, I suppose, where you pour coffee into those, and you're going to be happy doing that all day. You can go home after 12 hours from that job, and people say, how are you feeling? They're like, it was a great day. It's like, but you've been gone for 12 hours. You're like, I was doing things that fed me. Then there's those people that do, you know, they put a Starbucks in their little cup with a lid on it, and it'll hold that heat for a while, but not all day. So the working competencies are things we can do for a while, and that's okay. The working frustrations, we'll just say, is the cup that has the hole in the bottom that you pour coffee in and it gets drained right away. This is misery. If you worked at the most famous, wonderful company in the world, but it didn't fit your culture, or in an industry that you've always dreamed about working in, or had the title that you thought was great, and you're doing your working frustrations, that will be a miserable job. So we need to go into our interviews saying, here's who I am. You should know that these are the 2 things that I'm great at. And these things over here, I'm okay at those, and these are terrible. And if you're looking for somebody to do that, I'm gonna be so happy for you to kick me out of your office right now. But if you really want those, let me explain to you, I promise, you are gonna have the happiest, most motivated, most excited employee to come to work. And so that's how a job interview should be.
And this is the work that you're doing. A lawyer is not a lawyer is not a lawyer. If you dreamed about someday I want to be able to be a lawyer, well, there's lawyers who are doing enablement tenacity work. There are lawyers who are doing invention and galvanizing work. And so we ought to know what is the work that will energize us, and not just for a selfish reason, because that's how we're going to be able to contribute best. You're going to be happier. You're going to come home happier and more filled up when we're working and doing the work that we're meant to be doing.
And people will say, but you know, I want to do this kind of work, and they'll be like administrative assistant or the office, you know, like to be your executive assistant. Shouldn't it be this? And it's like, for me, I would want somebody with discernment who would figure things out and not have to ask me because I'm all over the place. So they would need to have this. Other people would say, no, I think I've got that. I need an ET who I can go to. They're going to say yes, and they'll finish. And both of them are totally valid. I mean, even teaching. People say, I want to be a teacher. And I say, what kind of teacher? Because, and they might even say a kindergarten teacher. And I go, you know, there's different ways to be a kindergarten teacher. So figure it out. And a school could hire you to be a kindergarten teacher. You get to have the best job in the world. And they could say, no, you're a WI. So you like to come up with new curriculums to inspire the kids. And they're going to go, we have a curriculum. We don't want you to stray from it. And all we're going to measure is whether or not you turn in your grades on time and the school year goes well. So even within a certain function, job, industry, if they don't value your geniuses, whatever they are, you're going to be miserable. So talk about that in your interview.
Okay, so there's 2 dynamics at play. There's the person who is looking for a job. Let's talk about that in a minute. There's also the person who has a job. And I love the way, I didn't know you were going to do that, describe the semi-permeable membrane. That is, if you're in a place that the culture fits, the mission is aligned, you like the people, the behaviors are the behaviors you want to be part of, but you want to change your job. You want to change the work that you're doing. How do you do that? How do you go talk to a manager about that change?
You know, everybody said, I need to change. If it's a cultural fit and you're just not happy, the thing you owe it to yourself to do is go to your manager and say, do you know I could do more for this place? I could be a better teacher. I could be a better marketing person. I could be a better assistant, a better engineer if I was able to exercise some of those things. Most managers want to hear that. Because they want you to do the best you can do.
Yeah.
But if we don't go to them and share, so we had a great story. I think it was a friend of yours who, right after Working Genius came out, he was having a performance review. Do you remember the story?
Yeah.
Can you tell it to us?
I want you to tell it, but I think, so I'll tell it and then you chime in. Is basically, had a performance review. We're on the verge of potentially getting demoted or fired because and they said, listen, here's what I've learned about myself. And I love the phrase you just said, I can do more. Because if you start as a manager with, please take these other things away from me, it's like, no. But he said, I think I could do more.
And let me see these. So like he came in there and, you know, like they have the performance review sitting on the table.
Yeah.
They're about to go through with him. He comes in the night before he did the Working Genius and he's like, can I show you this? So he lays it on the table, they look at it, and they were like, oh, you're in the wrong job.
Yeah, and we actually really need you.
They didn't even care anymore about the performance review.
Yeah.
And yet we're playing to that review, and he's like, this is who I am. And they were like, oh, and what happened to him?
Got promoted.
He got promoted. He thought he was going to get fired or demoted, but they're not trying to punish him. He's like, let me show you what I could do. And they were like, oh, we've got you in the wrong job. Because see, it was a cultural fit. It just wasn't a Working Genius fit.
And we tend to undervalue the work that we can do. We tend to think about, we have guilt about our areas of frustration, the things that are in this coffee cup with the hole in it. And we say no for us instead of being able to come to somebody and say, hey, one of my geniuses is invention. To be able to say, hey, I love coming up with new ideas. Would you let me be the first draft guy? Would you let me, when there's a blank slate and you need an email, you need a speech, you need something created, I'm willing to do more in that area.
Yeah.
And you know what happens is actually signing up to do more gives me more joy and energy.
Right.
It doesn't take it away.
I wrote this down because I was going to forget. But we think going to our boss and saying, hey, if I could do my work in a different way or maybe do a different thing, that we're needy or selfish. And they're going to go, hey, will you leave me alone? And actually you're saying, hey, I could help you and everybody else more.
Yeah.
It is not needy to speak up for your Working Genius. It's actually the right thing for everyone. That's the beauty of this. What helps the organization and helps you is a complete overlapping circle. And when we fail to tell people, I think I would love this more, we're not letting them slide us into the role that would be good for everybody.
Okay, so we asked folks in advance for questions. There's been questions in the chat. There's been a bunch of questions from people who are asking a question like this. What about if I'm new to the job market? I'm recently graduating, or a bunch of people are asking about if I'm returning to the job market. Maybe they stayed home for a little while, or they had a season where they weren't working. How does this apply there?
So I would say this. I would say don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. And that is because everybody has a first job, back into the job market or out of college or whatever else. And it's good to get you're going to learn. And can you know if it's a cultural fit or not? For sure, not often, not that easily.
Okay.
But if you know you're Working Genius, you can avoid doing what I did, which was taking a job that was clearly about my working frustrations. And I knew that, but the company name was great. The title I had was great. The pay was great. Little did I know, 2 years later, I would be miserable. And I would have a huge confidence problem because I'd have to go find my next job thinking, well, that one didn't go so well, and I didn't know why.
Yeah.
So if you know you're Working Genius, the one thing you can definitely do is don't go take a job that is playing to your weaknesses. You know, if like, I'd like to think like if you were a free agent in sports, or you were entering, and one team wanted you to play this position that you weren't good at, but they were going to pay you more, and another team wanted you to play the position that you're good at and you like, go to that one. Now, you don't have to play for them forever, and it might be a year or two later you find an even better fit, but start with at least knowing you're not going to be playing to your weaknesses. How many of us have taken jobs where in the interview we were like, well, I need a job, so I should do this. Nobody needs a miserable job. And if you do, I mean, if you're really poor, that's the saddest thing is people that are destitute, they just have to take any job. Unfortunately, it's going to be tough for them to thrive. But I get that. I feel for them.
So I'm imagining somebody is watching and saying, okay, but the world demands experience. I always have to put prior experience on my resume. How do you respond to that? This?
Well, let's go and talk about hiring now.
Let's do it.
Because everybody out there that's looked for work or thinking about that, they probably hired somebody.
Yeah.
And so here's the problems, because that word experience triggered me in a good way. Here's what happens when a company is trying to hire people, and they often don't get it wrong. Because as much as if it's a crapshoot to find a good job, it's a crapshoot for hiring people too. Because people go, well, we interviewed them, and why did we get it wrong? Here's why we get it wrong. Because we focus on this, education. Which is either the school they went to, which is stupid, because the school somebody goes to is never a good predictor. There's so few schools that are so clearly defined by something real that a company could say, well, they went to that school, therefore they're going to do great here. It's just ridiculous. The best employees I've ever hired were from, frankly, the only school thing is people that went to a school where they weren't going to come out with a star on their forehead or a sense of entitlement. They thought it's up to me, not my resume and the school and the sweatshirt I'm wearing, to make me successful.
Yeah.
So school is crazy. The other one is major. What did you major in?
Youth ministry and biblical studies.
Right. And so
look at how it's applied today. Yeah, exactly.
And so the point is, the other thing is you chose your major when you were 17 or 18.
Right. And
so to think that's, and you might have found halfway through school, well, I'm halfway into this now, I got to finish. I don't really want to do that. Now, you did want to do ministry, but it gets down to other things. So the major and the school you go to, ignore that. Ignore that, okay? The next one is the company, again. People will say, now, if you're coming out of a school, you don't have that. But sometimes you'll go to work and people say, well, I once worked at XYZ company. Go, oh, she worked at that company?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we should hire her. She's going to be great because if she worked there, then she must be amazing. Well, first of all, you don't know if that company aligns with your company. Secondly, you don't know if she liked it there. Third, you don't know if she was successful there. So the company they worked at, their educational stuff, we've got to, a friend of ours says, turn the resume over to the side that's blank and just talk to them. Now, the other thing.
These are really, by default, have I heard of them? That's really what most,
right.
Have I heard of that company? Have I heard of that school? And it's putting a bias, an assumption in your brain when you haven't actually learned what do they love to do? How might they actually contribute here?
Exactly. The other one is the industry. Like, well, he's worked in high tech for 20 years, so that means nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing.
They worked in marketing in the 90s, so they really must understand marketing today.
Exactly. And that's the functional area. You know, the industry or well, he's worked in the sports world, so he must understand this. It's like, no, these things tell you very little about a person. And I know people are looking at this thinking, but those are the things we look for.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, what we have to do is two things. Again, the same ones as before. We have to find out the work. Can they do the work that we want them to do? Whether they did it in a school or on a sports team or in a high-tech company, can they do the work? We hired Joe, not because he worked in finance, not in spite of that, but we had to figure out what he liked to do and make sure that we needed that. And then the other one is cultural fit, which, by the way, we spend even more time on that. So it's just like before. It's culture and work. And similar, I could draw the 2x2 matrix again. It's much better to hire somebody who's a cultural fit, whose working genius is a little off, because if you have enough jobs there, you'll figure out how to find their thing, than it is to find somebody that has this, but they're not a cultural fit. Because it's really tough to change a person, their stripes. So if you're going back, if you're hiring people, really focus on these two things.
And I've seen you describe this before, where there is sometimes a tension between the person's ability to contribute, the work that they love, their working genius, and the needs of the company. And I think you've drawn that as a Venn diagram before, where it's like, ideally you're looking for the overlap. You're looking for the...
It's like, exactly. Company need, personal's working genius, and the need in that, and it's find that place where they go together. So this person is super happy, and the company is like, man, they're cranking for us. That's what we got to do, is find that overlap.
So we're going to talk about some interviewing and actually get into the nitty gritty of interviewing. But before we did that, we had something that we thought would be fun to share.
Oh, that's right. Yes. Before we were as we were planning this webinar, I thought we should give you some great examples of how to go about looking for a job or to interview people. And so I went online, I did an exhaustive search, and we thought that these were some of the best examples we could find out there.
All right, let's tune in. Let's watch this.
Mr. Huff, Mr. Jenner is ready for your interview.
Actually, we'll be interviewing as a team.
Do you have any special skills?
Oh, yes. I do. I do voices.
What are your skills, girls?
Oh, we can dance. You mean like dancing? We're really good dancers.
Yes!
We've come to this planet looking for intelligent life. Oops, we made a mistake.
We're happy to be in America. Don't ask for a green card.
I want you in the worst way.
Mr. Matsuhisu.
Matsumoto.
Moto. Martha, can I call you Martha?
No, you may not.
Okay. Human resources lady.
It's Pam.
I'm sorry. Well, Pan.
No, my name is Pam.
Are you saying Pan or Pam?
I'm saying Pam. Yeah, I'm sorry. Who's this gentleman sitting behind you?
Hello, Ms. Lady.
I have fast food experience.
Yeah, like 20 years ago.
Do you have any experience?
No, sir, I have no experience, but I'm a big fan of money. I like it. I use it. I have a little. I keep it in a jar on top of my refrigerator. I'd like to put more in that jar. That's where you come in.
We're not generally comfortable in an office setting, I would say.
I get cooped up.
Not so task-oriented, not a workhorse.
I also get headaches from computers, so I can't be around them for too long.
I take stuff.
If you're looking for a Clydesdale, I'm probably not your man.
We're slow learners, and we're not particularly good listeners.
That'll be a huge problem.
We're also slow learners.
What's your policy on Columbus Day?
We work.
Really? The guy discovered the new world.
Let's do this, you know, you guys are hired. You're in, you know, unless you're like the weirdest guys ever and I don't see it.
Great.
I thank you for your time.
Actually, sir, I really need this job to impress a girl.
Will you leave now, please?
Please leave this office. We're done with this interview.
Do we get any sort of souvenir?
Get out of my office!
Hey, we tried, right?
Thanks a lot. Yeah.
My resume.
Okay, so we're back. So we're going to now take questions from the audience that you've been sending us in. Probably most of it inspired by those fantastic interview experiences. I don't know if you've seen all those movies, but we enjoyed watching those and talking about it.
So fun. And Cody's joining us. It says here on this cue card, I'm supposed to say that I'm glad you're here. So glad that you're here. Okay, so a great question, guys, about, okay, we've talked about Working Genius. Give me the basics. What's the best way to incorporate Working Genius into our hiring and interviewing? Like, tell me what does that look like? You've got a job, you've got a candidate. How do I use it?
Right. So you really should be thinking about this. You should be like, okay, so, sorry, I shouldn't have erased, huh? So you're thinking, okay, we have this job, right, Cody? And we need to hire somebody. We've gone through this many times here. And you can't say, well, it's a GTIWED job. And, you know, someday
I'll get tailwind.
Yeah, I'll get tailwind. And, you know, someday maybe people will put that into a system and it'll spit out a bunch of candidates, but it's never probably going to work that way, and it shouldn't. But though we don't do that, we can actually put some parameters around this, right, Cody?
Yeah, and I think it's great to use a real life example, which we have done before. But the first step that we've talked about is, hey, let's identify what part of this job, what would be the best, the most ideal set of Working Genius, one letter that this job would really require.
Right, and we might say we have a job, and if they don't have T in their genius,
it's going to be a bad.
It's probably not. Yeah. And so let's talk to people who love finishing things.
Yep.
You can interview for that. You could say, do you like that? Tell me about how you would deal with this. This is what we need. And I love that idea that we talk about scare them with sincerity.
Yeah.
What is that about?
Well, and so when you get to the stage where you might think they're a cultural fit, if you're interviewing someone and you're thinking, oh, they have some of the experience we're looking for, which we covered some of that, and then they're a cultural fit, at the end of the day, you want to be very clear about saying, hey, in this job, we really want someone who's going to push projects through to the finish. And if you're not like that, you're probably not going to like the job. So it's not really about
and we might not like you.
Yeah, it's like, no, I want to be really clear. If you're not into blowing through obstacles and finishing projects and checking things off the list, this is probably not the right job for you. So
it's like we just hired this guy, Joe.
Yep.
And this is one of the things we said, we need somebody like that. We don't have a lot of this in our company.
Yep.
And we've traditionally undervalued it, and we need it. And that has to be, we have to hire somebody with that. But then we said, which ones would be nice? They have to be, so that would be like if his working geniuses. Which are the ones that have to at least be in their working competencies?
Can't be a frustration.
It can't be a frustration. So there's two ways to look at that. It can't be over there. And it's okay if it's over here. And Joe had discernment. We said he's going to have to make some decisions and figure things out. So if discernment is not in his working genius, it's okay as long as it's here. But if it's down here, that might be a problem.
And I think that's, if you only did two things in this, which is identify what the job is, what is required for that job.
One thing that's got to be there.
And say, and it would be really, really bad fit if somebody had a working frustration. In this case, you know, it's great to use that example, Joe. Joe is going to be working with our clients, helping us, you know, relationship sales sort of thing. And if he had discernment as a frustration and constantly needed to ask questions or not know what the right answer was in the room, that would probably be bad for him.
And in some jobs, that's totally fine because they're like, here's what we need you to do, and they're gonna be a tiger and take it on. But he's gonna have to figure this out.
So tell me, guys, if I'm not allowed to require somebody to take an assessment before an interview, what do I do? Do I just talk about this? Do I explain the model? Are there questions that you would ask?
I think it's far more important for the hirer to know what they're looking for than it is for the person to have done an assessment. Because there's laws about can you use an assessment? You're not supposed to, or you can in some types. It doesn't matter because when the people doing the hiring don't know what the assessment would tell them, it's useless. So I would much rather have a hirer go, we need a T. We need a T. We need somebody that's not, and it's not the negative of the D. And other than that, we can flex the job for them. The chances of that job, that hire being a good fit, when you interview them, just interview around those things.
And what I love what this model did is it breaks down what work is. So you don't necessarily have to have a sheet in front of them that says, oh, hey, you can describe these activities in the context of the job to say, you know, another example would be, hey, you know, and you look at the job and even the context of the team, I think is helpful. If you're hiring in the context of a team and you say, hey, you know what? Our team really doesn't have a galvanizer. We really need someone that's going to get up and rally the troops and really help push the momentum and energy of these projects forward. So when you're in the conversation in an interview, you can say, hey, we have a deficit here. We're really looking for someone that can fill this role for us.
Do you love that?
And if you do, it's going to be great for our team. We're going to give you all the airtime you need to get us rallied around these things. So it's not a buy-sell based on the paper. It's actually a conversation to help you determine, hey, do you love this activity?
Right.
Okay, Matt just handed me a question that feels related to this. Do our working geniuses change over time? That is, a candidate who's done the work of galvanizing before, does that mean they're always going to be a galvanizer, or can those change over time?
We are very confident that they don't. Now, people can learn to do things. People can get good at their working frustrations, which is not something I ever recommend. People can force themselves to be good at it. Usually there's going to be some other problem that comes out as a result of that because they're doing it out of their wounds. And people can get pretty good at their working competencies, which I think is not a bad thing. But if you're not being filled with your working genius, that's going to create a problem. Everyone we've talked to, we talked to their, like, what was it like when you were a kid? Like Tracy in our office has discernment, which means this morning I said, Laura, should I wear this? She goes, well, you don't decide until you ask Tracy. Literally, she said that this morning. Tracy said when she was a little kid, her friends would do that. Like, Tracy, what should we do? I go back to me being an ID. I was an ID when I was little. I didn't know what ID meant. Nobody else around me knew what it meant either. And I look back and think, oh, I always wanted this. So I think that I don't think it changes. I think we need to strip things back and get to the point where, like, when I could do things that I would just be joyful and energetic about, that's what it is. So I think, don't you think?
I will say, I sometimes use the analogy. I felt like I was watching the movie Usual Suspects when I when I found out my working genius, because and you have this huge revelation, and then you go back through your history, and I was like, that's why I didn't love that job, and that's why I was struggled in that class, or so I don't think that it's changed over time. I will say this, that if someone's asked that question because they've taken it 3 years ago and then they took it again, I think more often than not, it's the mind frame that you're in when you're taking it, and because we often will take it as a way of thinking, what am I required to do at work versus what do I find joy and fulfillment in?
Yes.
So that can kind of represent if it does feel like it has changed for someone.
Right. It's like the guy that went to med school.
Yeah.
He said, hey, I got through med school. I must be a T. And we were like, did you like med school? He goes, oh, I hated it. I hated it. It was such a grind. And he's like, I hated tenacity stuff.
There's some people who love that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, I thought this was a really interesting question. Are there certain geniuses that lend themselves to particular jobs? We get this kind of question all the time. Got it today. What's the best kind of genius for a nurse? What's the best genius for a lawyer? Or have you seen any patterns about geniuses in alignment with particular jobs?
Okay, the answer is no. But it's like, yes, for a role. The role is the work.
Yeah.
A job, often we think of as a title. It's like, what's the best type to be a teacher? There's no answer. To be a CEO, not an answer.
Yeah.
The best type for anyone is what's the answer you like to say is what?
Self-aware.
Yeah.
You have to know what your genius is. You have to know what your frustrations are. You have to look to your team members to fill in around you, whether you're a teacher or a CEO.
Yeah.
And we've been in rooms, Pat, executives in companies or frontline managers who have every single combination of these letters.
Right. So if you know what you don't have and you're comfortable and secure enough to ask people to fill in the gaps for you, that's fine. Now, I'm going to change my answer, though, because I was at a college at Auburn University. Julie's a big fan. My son goes to school there, and I was in a class and they did their working genius, and one kid said, I have a job lined up for when I graduate, and he said, I'm doing cold call sales on his own. And then I said, can you give me your letters? And they were both, I think he was a DE, and cold call sales, it's not a team, it's him breaking down doors. And I said, I don't know that you're gonna love that. Could you be on a team of people that did that? Absolutely, but if it's all up to you and you have to get people to do things and drive the sale to its closure, that might be tough for you. And he was like, yeah, I've been thinking that. Yeah. So maybe there's, because that cold call sales is a role, not a job. Could a person with his type be in sales? Yeah, absolutely. But it would be relationship sales. It would be analyzing the needs of the customer. But cold call is like, I'm gonna keep calling, I'm gonna talk him into talking to me, and I'm gonna schedule a meeting. Yeah. And he was like, yeah, I don't think I'm gonna like that. So it's really the role, not the job.
What's the inverse of that? How do you coach somebody who's looking for a job? They know they're working genius, but the company doesn't. So I guess, first of all, is there a list of companies that are using working genius? That's probably would be sort of interesting to find out. I think the answer is no. But if you are looking for a job, if things don't go well here at the table group and you've got to move on, how would you approach another company with your geniuses?
I mean, I really think it's a great thing to go sit down and talk to people about it. And just say, I want to help you know me, because I don't want you to hire me if it's not good for you or for me.
Yeah.
But even make it about them. I know you've hired people, they don't always work out. I'm going to give you a shortcut in understanding me.
That's so good. It's scaring people with sincerity the other way.
The other way.
That's exactly right.
It's like if you go on a date, you go, hey, listen, I like to golf. And I've always golfed, and I think it's kind of a part of my life. If that's something that you're going to hate, maybe this isn't going to work out. Or I don't know. That's a very tactical one. But
that sounds like somebody who wants to be single.
I love that you golf.
No, but I do think that the scaring with sincerity and the relationship analogy is a good one, because when you're going on a first date or the first couple dates, the goal is not to trick them into liking a version of you that is not really you. Like you want to be able to say like, hey, I snore a little bit at night, and I do, I love fishing or whatever. And for them to kind of get a sincere picture of who you are, because so many people go to that interview, sell this version of themselves on their resume, get in a job that they're miserable in, and then find themselves stuck for 10 years in that job.
And think about it, like when I got out of college, I got the job everybody wanted. And I was like, yes, I got it. If somebody had said, hey, do you think you're gonna like doing it? Do you know what the job entails? I'd be like, no. That would be like saying, she's going out with me. Yeah. Have you ever met her? No, but she's hot. I mean, and I wouldn't talk like that, but my wife is hot. But I mean, I don't want to say, anyway, the point is she nice? I don't know. Yeah. This is gonna be the worst experience of your life. But we do that.
Yeah. We do.
And companies do it too. We signed him. We signed her. She's gonna work for us. What do you like about her? She worked at XYZ company. Yeah. It's like, did she succeed there? Does she fit here? Is she gonna like the job? I don't know.
Yeah. So good.
It's crazy.
Okay, we are getting amazing questions. I want to get to more of them. So I love this question. I can't wait to hear how you respond to it. How can knowing your working genius help you ace the interview?
Well, what does ace the interview mean? Impressing them? Well, first of all, it would be this is a great thing. Oh, I love this question. This just came in, so I didn't. Acing the interview should go in there and telling them who you are. And I always tell people this. People are like, well, the job market's kind of down. You only need one job. We had a baseball coach when I was a kid, and he always said it only takes one pitch. Yep. You know, you only need one pitch. And so go in there and tell them the truth. And half the time they're going to do what your friend did, and they're going to go, oh, yeah, you wouldn't be good for this job. Yeah. But Susan has a job in marketing that you would be awesome for. Acing the interview is one thing, just like acing the first date. Are you authentic? And have you put yourself out there so the best possible decision can be made? And we all think jobs are about going to Indeed and finding the job listed there. And what do they say? 5 years of experience in this, blah, blah. Nobody says, but do you like doing what we need?
Right.
Do you know what I think Working Genius, I know you have a comment, that can really help in an interview is answering that pesky question of tell me about your weaknesses. Yep. Because we end up all saying, I care too much, or I work too hard. Yep. And it actually could help to say, for somebody with the frustration of discernment, they might say, you know what, I really struggle to make the decision. I need people around me to help be able to make the decision. Or somebody without tenacity. Imagine what that's like, not having tenacity. Is to say, I struggle to get things all the way across the finish line with high standards.
I start things, but it's hard for me to do the last part.
Yeah.
That's very similar to what I was going to add, which is, I mean, so much of what we teach around teamwork is about vulnerability. The ability to stand in front of a team or a colleague and say, hey, you're better at this than me, and just being honest and sincere. You know, acing the interview is not about going and presenting yourself, misrepresenting yourself. It's about presenting yourself exactly as you are and saying, hey, I know exactly how I'm going to contribute to your team. And here's some of my weaknesses. And I love that because we so often the polished interview conversations that we have are, yeah, I'm a workaholic, I'm too detail oriented or whatever it is. And to be able to say, hey, I know exactly how I'm going to contribute. I also know, like, how much goodwill does that earn you in the interview itself to say, hey, I'm willing to tell you what I'm not particularly, I don't enjoy. But even going in and saying, hey, like, for example, I don't have tenacity. I can go in and say, hey, listen, that is not my favorite thing. I have learned ways to make sure that my projects get across the finish line.
Exactly. It's not an
excuse. If that's what you require from me, I'm not going to love it here. You know. So I think it's just that vulnerability, honesty, and
I love
being
that.
Sincere.
Because every time I ask that question in an interview and I can think about it, I would say, I really want to know. And aside from an axe murderer or a heroin addict, when God bless heroin addicts, that's a problem. But aside from it not being something that's just untenable, what I'm really looking for is authenticity. Because I can work with a lot of things, but I can't work with what I don't know.
Yeah.
So.
And it's really, really hard to work if they don't know.
Oh,
I mean, that's really, really hard. Okay, really interesting real life scenario somebody sent in. I'm going to read it to you. This is so fun to do live. I have an employee who's a great fit culturally, but they lack the discernment that's necessary for their role. They're a wonder plus invention. Discernment is a frustration. Should I let them go?
No, probably. It depends. If they said we're a 3-person company and these are the only things we have, sometimes you have to say, I love you, you're a cultural fit. I love that you're a whatever you are, in this case a WI. We just don't have a WI job for you here. But the great thing is they don't feel rejected or undignified. It's like, you really need to find a place, and here's and I'll help you with that. But if it's a company of any size, it's like, let's figure out what other people, we've been into a few organizations recently where everybody's doing their working genius and they're going like, it's like a job fair. It's like, who are we underutilizing? So there's no bad working genius type. Now, I will say this, when people are graduating from college, ETs are going to have the easiest time finding their first job.
Yeah.
Because there's so much work where they're like, will you just do what we ask you to do and be excited about it and finish?
Yeah.
And my first job was this, and I have none of that. And I have this. And so it's a little harder, but there's no benefit to finding a bad job.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people say major in finance or engineering, and God bless finance and engineering people, because those jobs lend themselves to lots of hiring right out of school. But if you majored in finance or engineering and you didn't like it, you know, I know a guy who majored in engineering, and when he got out of school, he's like, I want to be an airline pilot.
Yeah. Cool.
And he had the courage to go, I'm not going to stick to that just because I chose that major and struggled through a bunch of classes. I'm going to go do what I love.
Yeah.
Okay, I think this is such an interesting question, and I love putting you on the spot, so I can't wait to do this for you. A couple of questions about Gen Z, which is kind of basically the question is, this next generation of workers.
Yeah.
What is your advice about that? And of course, we've all seen for decades, whoever is in their 20s gets picked on for, oh, kids today and all that. Is there something real about that for this generation leaving college and getting their first job? And what's your advice about recruiting them, hiring them, even leading them?
Yeah, they're worthless, and you should wait until this generation passes. No, it's not like that at all. It's not like that at all. The problem is every generation, first of all, you're right. Everybody says, oh, kids today, you know. Yeah. The issue is there's two things going on. One is what's happened in the last 4 years, and that is that there's been a bunch of people that have not really gone to work. Or they've worked in like I stay home and I do this one thing. So they haven't got the relationship. I know kids that go, I really want this job. Why? And they go, because they're not going to make me go into the office. Yeah. And I was like, oh, what a tragedy. Because they have kind of learned that it's just a trade-off of my time for that paycheck. I don't identify with it. I don't feel any sense of like loyalty to the culture and all that. That's a sad thing for them. So just you got to be patient, and you got to actually take a little bit more time to connect them with this and with the culture. But there's nothing inherent in younger people today that is different than younger people before, other than the way they grew up, which is a little bit more detached because of this. Yeah. But boy, once they connect, it's so, quit. We got to quit asking. That would be like asking any other demographic category. Right. Is there something wrong with these people? It's like, no, find a way to tap into their genius.
Well, I would even say that companies that actually adopt working genius, the underlying principle in this is that work is not a transaction. It is, it's about being dignified, that you're wired in a way to contribute to your team and to the world. And so this might represent a competitive advantage in the current landscape of work, which is, hey, there are a bunch of people who think of work as a trade of my time for the dollar amount on my paycheck. And there's so many people that don't ascribe to that model that want to say, hey, I believe that I have something to offer. I want to find a job that actually inspires me to want to live into the gifts that I have.
Yeah, and there are, I think that this is, we did a podcast, I think, about this. We talked about, there are companies that are transaction oriented. Yeah. They see it that way too. Yeah. And there's other companies that are, fulfillment and mission oriented, and they have a different view. If you're certain that you want to work that way, and maybe there's a time in our career where we're like, I just kind of want to get a paycheck and do something for somebody, find a company like that because you will fit there. But if you're the kind of person that wants somebody that's going to take an interest in you and you want to go deeper and figure it out, find this. Now, how do you do that? You talk to people that work there. Wow. You talk to people who work there and say, do you think they're interested in you? Don't look at their website, because the ones that are the worst at it have the best websites that oversell it because they feel like they have to. Yeah. And it's not about the benefits they have, because some of the worst companies in the world have infinity pools and organic produce until they want to cut everybody and they lop their heads off. Yeah. Find a company and talk to people that work there and say, is this about the mission? And is part of that mission knowing us and us knowing them?
Yeah. Okay, a couple quick
details. Did you see the buildings I drew there? I mean, wow.
I got the whiteboard.
Wow, yes, there it is.
This guy, best-selling author and an artist. Okay, Pat, I have one more question for you, but let me just share an observation. We've worked with some companies who are really trying to adopt this, and if you're wondering how do you get this off of the whiteboard and into our culture, I think we're going to send an email to everybody, including a hiring guide. We'll give you information about certification, which is a 2-day virtual training where you can learn how to get this embedded into your organization and into your team. And if you have somebody that you want to watch this, It's almost too bad because we're only showing this live, but we do have 2 rebroadcast times.
Yeah.
This will be available tonight at 7 and tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Both of those are Pacific time.
I'm going to watch both of them.
You should do that. And then I have so many more questions here. Let's record a podcast on the Working Genius podcast where we take more of these questions. We can dive more into hiring and teams, and that'll be released sometime this month. If you're not subscribed to our podcast, you should be, because it's fantastic. We get to dive into content like this all the time. Pat, your final thoughts, your last thoughts about jobs, careers, and hiring for anybody watching.
I just think that when that question comes up about your career, I think we need to start going, stop. All I need is to find work that is going to give me joy and energy, and good things will happen. Yeah. And so resist the temptation to get lured into what's your legacy, or how are you going to, what's that theory, Cody? Like, if you're full, Matt talks about it, like, you don't need to finish your dinner because it's only going to make you feel worse. It's the sunk cost thing. But I've spent 5 years in that industry, or spent 4 years studying that. You don't have to continue. You always have the opportunity to shift. I don't care if you're retiring, you can have if you're later in your career, if you're just starting out and you majored in something, you always are better off paying attention to, first, the culture of the organization, and second, what God intended you to do.
I love, you use the phrase a lot, Pat. The only thing worse than not having that conversation, not saying, oh, I'm going to take the risk and try something else, or try to find a job that fits my working genius. The only thing worse than that is actually not doing it and staying where you're at.
Absolutely, because you learn from that. It's a process. That's what I would say. No more career talk. It's about work. Or as my friends in Scotland say, work. Find good work. All right. That's the end of our webinar.
Yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks, Pat.
This has been a blast. Karen and Tracy are sitting right there. Karen's been telling me everything to say on our podcast. For joining us, and God bless.